Between Sunday school and church, anybody has any clue how to turn this microphone on, please let me know. All right. We do have bulletins in the back that are for this week. We aren't using the screen today because that laptop belongs to Sister Candace, and so they didn't have that prepped and ready and all of that. So anyway, we're going to, do it the way we always used to do it, and use a bulletin and sing out of the hymn book, and we'll be good, right? So just a couple announcements that are in the bulletin in case you didn't grab one yet. One is, please remember, ladies, if you're planning on attending the Mother's Day tea, there's a sign up in the back. I believe there's instructions on there how she'd like you to put your numbers as far as like if you're bringing maybe a friend or a daughter or a granddaughter or something like that. She doesn't need the name of everybody, she just needs your name, and I think then the number of the other people, knowing that, so if you put 5, she knows your number 6. I think that's how that is. For the tea, so that we can be ready for everybody that's going to be there. There's still a sign-up sheet there for volunteers for the Breaking Bread outreach on May 16th. So that's coming up not too far from now. That Mother's Day tea, I didn't mention the date, but it's on the 2nd. Pastor asked me to remind you that if you were, because we did things a little different, the first Sunday of the month, something was different. Who can tell me what that? It doesn't matter what it was. Anyway. We did take up the AIM offering officially, I think, or something, and he said if you didn't happen to give your AIM missions offering, that you could feel free to do that today as long as you mark that appropriately. And then Sister Jen mentioned to me that the online tithe paying process was not functioning properly earlier today, but it is back up and running, and so if you are used to paying your tithes that way and you had any trouble with that, you should be fine this afternoon when you get home to take care of that. I believe maybe Sister Jen has another announcement, as I saw her hand. Oh, she just wanted me to remember that one. Okay, good. So those are the things that we'll be want to remember today for our announcements. I think it's time for our missions giving for the boys and the girls. Tobias, he helped the men win a couple weeks ago, and then last week the girls were back on the winning rampage, and I think he decided, forget it, he didn't even come to Sunday school this morning. Yeah. I know to us, because it's a fun little competition. It feels like winning and losing, but in the end, it's winning for the Lord, right? Because it's something that we're giving to the Lord in obedience to Him, and something that's helping further His kingdom and missions. And so we're grateful for that today. Did we have any birthdays this week? Sister Gross is saying, I don't think so. And I don't see any hands flying in the air admitting they're 98 years old. So, any anniversaries? We are heading into wedding season. Any anniversaries? Well, then I guess we're done singing, and it's time to head on to Sunday school. Did I miss anything?
You did good, honey.
Hope not. Hope not. As Pastor would say, Brother Dennis is coming to teach Sunday school. Oh, look at that. Here I am. I didn't see one. So just before we get into Sunday school, I didn't want to mention anything in front of any of the kids that were here because I didn't know what they would know or what have you, but I would ask you to please remember the family of little Brooks Ambrose. I'm not sure some of the names, I don't know all of them personally, so some of the names have escaped my mind. Who are the great-grandparents? The Powers. Yes, the Powers.
Yes.
And then it would be Dawn and Irvin Ambrose are the grandparents. They're the little 2-year-old, if you didn't hear, ended up in the street while the whole family was out playing, and a truck came by, and unfortunately that little boy is in heaven. Well, fortunately for him, but unfortunately for the family, that little boy is in heaven today. And so we want to remember that whole family. There are some from this church who will be heading to the funeral tomorrow evening. There are several people from our church in Maine who are very close to them because they used to live up that way, I guess. And so they were in New Jersey this morning, heading there to be there for the funeral tomorrow. So if you would in your prayers, please remember that family. All right, let's look into our Sunday school lesson today. Can't guarantee that we'll get through it because somebody started Sunday school late this morning. I don't know who it was, but somebody made us 10 minutes late. And so we're going to look at, we're in the second half of the quarter, and so we're starting a new, series, I guess we would call it. And it's going to be on the book of Daniel. And so today our lesson is Faithful to God in Babylon. And we're in Daniel chapter 1. Our central truth is God rewards those who choose to follow His ways. Our key verse is Daniel 1:8. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he, the king, drank. Quick question for you this morning, as usual. If you were going to move to another country and totally immerse yourself into that country, so I'm not talking about going as a tourist, okay? I'm talking about totally going full immersion into that country. So you would do your best to adopt their culture, their clothing styles, their way of life. Is there somewhere that you'd love to go? Maddie's saying, yeah. Where?
Anywhere.
Oh, anywhere.
Mexico.
Where? Germany, Mexico.
I've got an Israel.
Israel.
Hawaii. Oh,
Hawaii.
That's a good one.
I'll just stay here.
You just stay here. Did you say something, Dave? Italy. Cool. Some cool places. I won't tell you, remember we talked about full immersion and we talked about adopting all their ways, right? So, we can't go down the road of hula hoops and coconuts right now. But, So, Daniel didn't have a choice. Daniel and his friends about going to another country. And if that other country had their way, they wouldn't have had a choice as to whether or not they were permitted to refuse to adopt the culture in their ways. But Daniel, we're going to see in our lesson today, took a stand for his God. And though there was some, what should I say, not everybody was really for that. They didn't really want to see that happen. We'll see who that was in a minute. But they decided to, hey, okay, let's just give this a try, and we'll see that the Lord helped them to be able to take a stand, even in that culture, to continue serving their God. And we aren't going to get to the point in the lesson today, because today's lesson doesn't cover it, but we will even see, I'm sure you'll see in future lessons, other times that Daniel will take a stand for God and not for the culture and the ways of this new country that he was a part of, and how God came through for him time and time again, right? We see that over and over here with this group of guys. And so let's take a look at our lesson. And see what we've got going on here. So we're in Daniel chapter 1, verse 1, where they're exiled to a pagan or a non-God-fearing society. And so in verse 1, in the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And so Nebuchadnezzar comes along, King Nebuchadnezzar, and he overtakes, overthrows, besieges, is the word here, the city of Jerusalem, and takes it over. Verse 2, and the Lord gave Judah into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God. Did you hear that? Nebuchadnezzar came in and overthrew Jerusalem. And we would like to think, they probably would like to think, that this was simply an evil, wicked ruler who was, wanted to dominate his world, coming in and just besieging the city and taking everybody captive because of his evil motives and ways. But we read right in verse 2 that the Lord gave Judah into his hand. There were reasons for that, right? Because there were things going on in Jerusalem that the Lord had dealt with over and over and over and over again with his people. But at the same time, though we could maybe from our hindsight perspective say they got what they were asking for, the point that I want to make is we have to always understand, no matter what the political situation is, God is in control. Right? Other verses of Scripture make this very clear. We read in the Bible where he sets up rulers and he takes them down. Right? And so God ultimately is in control. So when you take a look at or listen to or observe the political scenes across the globe, remember that God is in control. No matter what they look like, no matter how it feels to you, like things are going or the way things are happening, God is in control. God is setting up rulers and he's taking them down. And very often it looks very much like man and the devil are the ones that are in control of politics, because they're usually pretty warped and not good, right? But ultimately, God is in charge. Ultimately, God is moving things. It's almost like a chess game, almost, except it's only one-sided. God's the only guy really playing the game, and he's always gonna win. Okay? So we have to remember that. So, verse 3, and the king spake unto the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel. Just a couple of kind of like side notes. I assume you all know what a eunuch is. Okay? You don't. I have people shaking their hands. Okay? Not shaking their heads. Sorry, not shaking their hands. Maybe they're shaking their hands too, but I can't see your hands. Oh, there's my wife shaking her hand. A eunuch basically is a male who has been castrated so that he cannot bear children. He cannot have children, produce children, or whatever term you want to use there. Okay? So, quite often in some of the political leadership area of certain cultures of that day, if someone either worked their way up to that position or what have you, that's what they had to look forward to, right? And so this guy, Ashpenaz, was the master of the eunuchs, and he was spoken to, and he had to bring some of the children of Israel. And so, verse 4, children in whom was, listen to this, no blemish, but well-favored, skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had the ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. I'm not really sure if that's Chaldeans or Chaldeans. And so what was going to happen is they were going to get these guys, right, these children of God, really, and they were going to bring them in and kind of become part of, like, inducted, if you will, into the king's service. But they were particular about who they were choosing to do this. It was almost like they were taking, some scholars believe, it doesn't straight up say this, but some scholars believe what they were doing was taking those who may have even been royalty or in high places of leadership in Jerusalem and bringing them in, and now they were going to train them, or in some ways we could say retrain them, reprogram them to function in the ways of Babylon instead. Okay? And so they were bringing in educated, knowledgeable young men into this place. And some even believe, because of the position that they were bringing them into, that part of what would happen to these young men is they too would become eunuchs. And so anyway, they're bringing them in, and it says in verse 5, and the king appointed them meat and wine, so nourishing them 3 years that they might stand before the king. So this was going to be a 3-year process. The king was going to make sure they had the meat and the drink that they needed. They were going to be educated. They were going to be trained in a new language, learn a new language. They were going to be trained in how things ran and functioned and worked in this new place that they were brought to, Babylon. And so this was kind of like the scenario of what's going on. And so then in verse 6, it says, "Now among these were many of us, if we're familiar with this story, we're familiar with their given names, and we're familiar with their new names. And that was something that quite often happened when people were taken into captivity or even taken into slavery of sorts. They would be given a new name. And don't you find it interesting that when we give our lives to Christ, we're no longer slaves to this world and the enemy in the flesh, but now we're servants of the Most High, that we are given, Scripture says we're given a new name as well. Amen? So that's kind of like a cultural thing that goes on or went on. So among these were Daniel. In our understandings, in our minds, Daniel was kind of like the head of these guys. He was the top dog. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Verse 7, "Unto whom the eunuchs gave new names." And so they renamed Daniel Belteshazzar. And they renamed Hananiah Shadrach. They renamed Mishael Meshach. And they renamed Azariah Abednego. And just a little point here. I hear most people pronounce that word as if it's Abend, B-E-N-D, Abednego. The D and the N are actually opposite. It's Abednego, A-B-E-D-N-E-G-O, Abednego. But isn't it so much easier in our English language to say Abednego?
Yes.
So anyway, but they weren't English, so they didn't care. So anyway, but those were the new names that they were given. I do find it interesting that as we proceed through the book of Daniel, and maybe because it is the book of Daniel, but as we proceed through the book, we continue to hear Daniel being referenced as Daniel most of the time, not Belteshazzar. But we do hear the other three being referenced by their new names. So, verse 8, "But Daniel purposed in his heart." We've been dealing all the first half of the quarter with the heart of the issue is the issue of the heart through the Sermon on the Mount, right? And here we're even dealing with, here's Daniel, who's having to determine in his heart. That's where the bottom line of it all is, right? And so he determines in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's meat nor the wine. Verse 9, "Now God had brought Daniel into favor with the prince of the eunuchs." Go figure. God, did you hear that? God. It wasn't Daniel being a smooth talker, Daniel being some charming dude. No, God gave Daniel favor with the prince of the eunuchs. Jen.
To me, when I read that and he speaks to the eunuch and he tells him that he doesn't want to defile himself, it implies to me that he also explained to them the spiritual part of it. Because in the Hebrew word for defile, it means that not to stain or pollute yourself. Mm-hmm. And so, as a human, I read that story and I'm like, why? Like, such a little thing of food, like, such a little thing. Why would you even, bring religion into it, eat it? But then to hear him say that he doesn't want to defile himself, it shows me that God was so important to him, even in the smallest, littlest things, he did not want to go against God with. Right. It brings me courage, and it makes me think that even in the little things, I need to follow God.
Great point. Great point. There are so many things we can just kind of pass off as right? But he was very conscientious. He was very aware of the condition of his heart and where it needed to be. He had to have been in a position in Jerusalem that he was very aware of what things were probably like in Babylon. He didn't go in, though he was brought into this situation unwillingly, he wasn't brought into it unknowingly, right? And so he's determining in his heart that he's not going to defile himself in any way. And one of the ways that would happen was giving in to much of, because the food and drink in this pagan country, many of it was sacrifice to idols or was idol sacrifice and that kind of thing. And so he didn't want to be involved in any of that and defile himself with any of that. But I love the fact that it says God brought Daniel into favor. I want us to understand that God can give us, as his people, favor even in this world. In our workplace, at our schools, wherever we might be, God can give us favor even in this world. But with that, we must understand that we have to determine in our hearts that we're not going to be defiled by the world in the process. Right? We're not going to find that favor if we just so assimilate ourselves with this world. That's not going to happen. But when we stand for God, God can give us favor. Just like he did with Daniel. And so, and the prince said, excuse me, I fear the king who hath appointed your meat and drink, for why should he see your faces worse? So what he's saying here is, I'm afraid of the king, because if you guys don't look good when he checks you out, guess what? It's my head on the chopping block. Literally. Not just figuratively, literally. He could lose his life for not doing his job right. Okay? And so he's saying, I fear the king, and you're asking me to let you do something here regarding the food and the drink that the king has provided for you, and you're asking me to allow you to do something different, and it could be my head. Like, it could be over for me. And when he sees how bad and unhealthy you're going to look if we do this. And so he says, then shall ye endanger my head, right? That's literally my head on the chopping block. Verse 11, then Daniel, I missed it. Then Daniel, because I do, I skip some things. Then Daniel said, I missed the word said. Then said Daniel, down to verse 12, prove thy servants 10 days. He said, give us 10 days. Just let us eat and drink according to our dietary purposes or preferences. 10 days and see what the results will be. He said, and let them give us pulse and water. And I thought to myself, pulse. What on earth is pulse? So if you asked yourself that same question, this is what pulse is. Edible seeds, vegetables, or herbs grown from sown seeds, including beans, lentils, peas, and whole grains like wheat and barley. Okay? That's what pulse was. So it's really a general term for a variety of things. It wasn't like manna, one thing that you're going to eat every day, every meal kind of concept. But there was no meat involved. In other words, to a certain degree, it was like a vegetarian kind of diet. But he said, just give us pulse and water. And the prince of the eunuchs is like, you got to be crazy, right? Like, there's no way you're going to be healthy as the rest of the guys. And I'm going to be in so much trouble. But he said, give us 10 days. And then down in the end of verse 13, and as thou seest, deal with thy servant. So what he's basically saying is, give us 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, whatever you think the results are, if it's good, good. If it's bad, it's bad. We understand. But we don't want to defile ourselves. We're asking your permission to do this for 10 days. Kind of like a test, right? A trial run, or if you will. In verse 14, so he, meaning the prince of the eunuchs, consented and proved them 10 days. In verse 15, and at the end, their countenances appeared fairer than all the children which did eat the king's meat. They looked better, healthier, their skin and complexion even looked better than anybody else. Now, don't get too excited thinking, when I leave church today, I'm going to go on a 10-day pulse diet, and I am going to be looking fine. Okay? 10 days in the natural is not enough time. But 10 days with God is more than enough time. Okay? And so many scholars believe, I agree with them, that there was some divine influence on the health and the complexion and all that had to do with the end result of this testing, this 10-day testing on this diet. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the diet, but it's not a miracle diet. Okay? Look at me. If I thought that 10 days would work, believe me, I'd go on it. But that was not necessarily the case. God was involved. Remember, God gave favor with the prince of the eunuchs, and God is honoring Daniel and his friends for keeping him first, for keeping their hearts in a place where they would not be defiled by the ways of... We often today refer to the term Babylon as the ways of the world, right? Like the epitome of the world was Babylon, okay? And so God was honoring that in them. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the diet they went on by any means. If you like to eat that way and want to eat that way, or feel God calling you to eat that way, feel free to do that. If we had had more time, I would go into the whole concept of what people today call the Daniel fast. It's not even really a fast, it's a Daniel diet. Okay? But anyway, we don't have to take time to go down that road. All right, so at the end, their countenance appeared fairer. Get this, not even equal to. I'm sure the prince of the eunuchs would have been totally satisfied, and even Daniel and his friends would have been totally satisfied if at least they came out equal to the rest of the guys. But they came out looking fairer than all the children that ate of the king's meat. Thus, Melzar gave them pulse. And so from then on, they were able to continue eating this way. And it's not like they only did this. The 10-day period was the testing period. But they continued this type of diet. It wasn't like after the 10 days they decided, okay, now let's, throw it all out and let's go eat the king's meat and wine. Right? This continued to be their lifestyle, if you will, while they were there. Verse 17, as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. Here we are again. This was not a natural thing for them. This was not, they were just born bright. This was not, okay? God, according to the word that we're reading, God gave this to them. I believe God gives to each of us. And we have to recognize what it is He's giving us and use that for him and for his glory, like Daniel and his friends did. And so God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So Daniel had this extra God-given gift, if you will, in all visions and being able to understand visions and dreams. And we're going to see that play out further down the line in the book of Daniel. Verse 18. Now the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Here comes the testing moment, right? This is like do or die at this point. They're coming before the king. This is going to be do or die for them. It's going to be do or die for the prince of the eunuchs as well. Verse 19, and among them was all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. Nobody's head ended up on the chopping block that day. Why? Because Daniel was a bright guy. Because Mishael knew what he was talking about. Because Azariah was Bill. No, because God had given them favor. And God had given them knowledge and understanding. God had been with them through this entire process. Do you realize these guys are coming out of a position of being God's children and thrown in the midst of the pit of the world? And instead of allowing all of that to influence them, they became the influencers. Are you an influencer in your world? That's a question only you can answer, you and God. But that's what God wants to do with you. He wants you to commit your heart in such a way that you will not be defiled by this world, but stand in the midst of it and be an influencer, not because of anything you do, but because of his hand of favor on your life. Allowing you and using you to be an influence in the midst of whatever the pit of your world around you is. Not everybody here has the privilege of having Christian coworkers like we hear Leslie testify about, right? Not everybody here has the privilege of working from home in your home environment like my wife and I do, right? There are those of you who are out there in the midst of it with everything coming at you that's totally opposite of what God says. And in that place, you, like Daniel and his friends, can determine in your heart, I'm not going to be defiled, and I'm going to allow God to position me, to train me, to give me the skills that I need and the knowledge that I need, and be an influence in those places where you are. And he can do that if you let him, just like he did for these guys. Verse 20. We're a couple minutes over. We're okay. Verse 20. And in wisdom and understanding, the king found them. Listen to this. Remember earlier, it just used the term fairer. Now we're going to put numbers to it. We're going to put a scale to it. The king found them 10 times better. 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers in his realm. That's what God can do for us, his children. When we find ourselves in those kinds of places like Daniel and his friends did, God can give you favor that you end up 10 times better than those around you. What we all have to be careful in those positions is we've still got to keep a heart of humility, right? Because, boy, the temptation for pride and arrogance to rise when you come out of a situation like that. Look what I did. You can even use all your spiritual terms. I refuse to defile myself. Right? And start taking the credit and start taking the glory because decisions you made for that to happen. But no, it's all God. It's all God because of His grace. Amen? God bless you. We'll be back here in a few minutes for service. And again, if anybody knows how to turn this microphone on, I'd love your assistance. If not, we'll survive with this. I don't see any on. Like all the rest of these microphones, see they have these microphones, and there's this little gray button. I don't feel it. Is that like a different type of microphone? It looks like the same thing. All of them, I've turned them all on, and they all have the same gray button. What'd you do?
Well, Maddie, I can't get it to shut off.